Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
Imagine American television without MASH. It's tough, right? That's because the show wasn't just popular. It reshaped what a sitcom could be. Premiering in 1972, during the final years of the Vietnam War, MASH Asterisk was set in Korean War and blended humor with heartbreak. Its quirky characters explored the absurdity of war and resilience of the human spirit. It quickly became a fan favorite. But behind the scenes, the show was constantly evolving. As it dove deeper into social commentary and complex character arcs, tensions sometimes rose. Several beloved stars eventually made the difficult choice to leave, were their exits personal, professional, or due to creative conflicts. The reasons may surprise you. Let's take a closer look at what really happened. History of MASH, a war story told with heart. There's a lot to unpack with this one. But before we get into it, let's rewind the clock and look at how this legendary series came to life. Like many other impeccable TV series, the story of MASH begins not on television, but in a book. Back in 1968, Dr. Richard Hooker, the pen name of Korean War surgeon H. Richard Hornberger, published MASH, a novel about three Army doctors. The novel was a fictionalized account of his time as a mobile Army surgical hospital doctor during the Korean War. And thanks to its mix of gallows humor with moments of human warmth and bitter reality, the book soon became a bestseller, catching Hollywood's attention in the process. 2 years after the book was published, director Robert Altman adapted the novel into the film MASH, a satirical black comedy that was both irreverent and sobering. The film starred Donald Sutherland as Hawkeye Pierce and Elliot Gould as Trapper John, and it struck a nerve with audiences, especially as the Vietnam War loomed large in American consciousness. The film soon became a critical and commercial success, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes and an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. But the real culture explosion came 2 years later, when CBS adapted the concept into a weekly TV show. Developed by Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds, the television version of MASH debuted on September 17, 1972. It kept the wartime setting and the offbeat humor, but introduced a more serialized, character-driven style that allowed for deeper emotional storytelling. Alan Alda stepped into the role of Hawkeye Pierce and quickly became the heart of the series. Although the first season struggled with ratings so much so that it was nearly canceled, CBS took a chance and moved it to Saturday nights. With this move, ratings soared. And so did the show's cultural impact. To many, the show also broke rules. It was the first of its kind in Hollywood, experimenting with format, using real war footage, and was even one of the first American comedies to regularly feature the sound of helicopters instead of laugh track. Alan Alda, who played Hawkeye, later became a director, writer, and creative force behind the show, pushing for more realism and emotional complexity. But as MASH matured, so did its characters, and let's just say not all the actors agreed with the new direction. Some felt their roles were shrinking or becoming caricatures. Others struggled with personal challenges or felt the urge to explore different creative paths. In general, over its 11-season run, MASH saw numerous cast changes, but through it all, it remained anchored in a singular mission: to show the cost of war through the lens of compassion, wit, and unbreakable human bonds. With this in mind, let's jump right into the first major exit from the series, an actor whose departure was so unexpected. The writers chose to kill off his character in a moment that shocked the nation. McLean Stevenson, if you ask longtime MASH fans what moment hit them hardest, chances are they'll point to the final scene of Season 3's finale, Abyssinia Henry. It was just one line, delivered quietly by radar, but it changed everything. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. That moment was groundbreaking, not just because it shocked audiences, but because it marked the first major departure of a core MASH cast member, McLean Stevenson. But how did we get there? McLean had been a vital part of MASH from the very beginning. As the affable, often confused commanding officer of the 4077th, his character, Colonel Henry Blake, was a perfect foil for the madness of war. Where Hawkeye and Trapper brought rebellion and wit, Henry Blake brought humanity, sometimes frazzled, sometimes clueless, but always well-meaning. In the early seasons, McLean's performance earned him widespread praise and a Golden Globe. He was funny, relatable, and deeply loved by fans. But behind the scenes, things weren't quite as harmonious. According to interviews and memoirs from the cast and writers, McLean grew increasingly frustrated with his role. While the show started as a loose ensemble comedy, it quickly began centering around Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. And as Alda became more involved in the writing and direction of the show, his character took on greater emotional and narrative weight. McLean, meanwhile, felt sidelined. So sidelined that he even once told People magazine in 1975, "I want to be number one. I want to be the guy carrying the show." But as egotistical as this probably sounds, it wasn't actually about McLean's ego. You see, McLean had these big dreams of becoming a star. He had huge ambitions. But if there's one thing you should know about Hollywood, it's that it's usually very easy for an actor to fall into a stereotypical role. And for McLean, he was falling into this pit that he wanted nothing to do with. He saw how powerful television could be, and he believed he had the charisma and talent to anchor a show of his own. He wanted to pursue opportunities where he wouldn't always be the second or third banana. He wanted to be the first. So, at the end of season 3, McLean approached the producers and told them he would not be returning. Now here's where things took a turn. Traditionally, when actors left sitcoms, their characters were written off gently, transferred, reassigned, and maybe even sent off to get married. But MASH wasn't a traditional sitcom. Its creators, Larry and Gene, saw an opportunity to do something bold. They wanted to remind viewers that MASH was, at its heart, a war story. That in war, not everyone makes a home. And this was the perfect opportunity. What succeeded this was a legendary Abyssinia, Henry episode. In the episode, Henry Blake receives his discharge orders and prepares to head home. Their celebration, tears, hugs, a joyful farewell. For 25 minutes, it feels like a happy ending. But then comes the final scene like a raging storm. Radar walks into the operating room, hat in hand, face grave. The doctors are mid-surgery when he breaks the news that Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. What followed was intense silence that could be heard around America. No dramatic music, no laugh track or helicopter noises. Just stunned faces and the beep of surgical equipment. That scene changed TV history. It was one of the first times a beloved sitcom character was killed off permanently and without warning. The raw reactions from the cast was partly real, as only a few knew the ending beforehand. Alda later revealed that Gary Berghoff, who plays Radar, was the only actor told in advance so he could prepare. The rest of the cast was reacting genuinely in that final take. As soon as it aired, the episode generated an immediate and intense response. CBS received thousands of letters, many praising the show's honesty, others angry that such a beloved character was taken away so suddenly. Some even accused the producers of going too far. But Larry defended the decision, saying, "We want to say that not everybody gets to go home." And that they did. But what happened to McLean after his departure? Let's just say things weren't as rosy as he probably imagined. Granted, things were pretty great at first. He signed a lucrative deal with NBC, eager to strike out on his own. He then moved on to star in the McLean-Stevenson Show, a family sitcom built around his affable charm. He appeared to be charting out his own terms and making a name for himself in the industry, but it was short-lived. His show was canceled after just one season, and a second attempt, with the show Hello, Larry, fared even worse. Despite high hopes and heavy promotion, the show was critically panned and became a running joke in later years. In retrospect, McLean would come to regret leaving MASH. In a 1983 interview with the Los Angeles Times, he admitted, "I took myself out of the game." It wasn't just that his new shows flopped. It was more so the realization that MASH was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The cast, the writing, the impact. It was lightning in a bottle. Some of his co-stars, like Alda and Loretta Swit, expressed sadness about his departure, but they also understood his desire to branch out. Others quietly wondered if he had been too quick to walk away from something special. Despite his regrets, McLean continued working in television and made occasional guest appearances on other shows. But he never found the same level of success or emotional connection with audiences as he did playing Henry Blake. When he passed away in '96 at the age of 68, tributes poured in from fans and colleagues, with Alda remembering him as a wonderful actor and good man, and Gary calling him a light-hearted spirit who brought joy to everyone around him. Say what you want about McLean, but in a way, his departure gave the show its soul. And that's the irony. While he may have left to find his big break, the role he walked away from became the most enduring of his career. But if you thought McClane's departure was nerve-wracking, Wayne Rogers' exit from MASH was something else entirely. Quiet, complicated, and full of drama behind the scenes. Wayne Rogers, while McLean got a farewell episode, a tearful goodbye, and a moment that became TV history, Wayne Rogers simply disappeared. We saw him in one episode, and the next, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, and certainly no closure. Why, you ask? Let's just say things aren't always as rosy on set as they might seem on camera. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Wayne Rogers played Trapper John McIntyre, one half of the original comedic duo that defined MASH's early seasons. He and Alda's Hawkeye Pierce were the life of the 4077th. The chemistry between the duo was magnetic, and audiences loved it, especially when they decided to throw in their fast-paced banter, mischief, and their unshakable friendship. It was like watching a wartime version of The Odd Couple, albeit with scalpel jokes. But behind the laughs, tension was secretly brewing. As it turns out, Wayne had signed on to MASH under the impression that it would be a true ensemble show with equal screen time for the core cast. But as the series evolved, much of the spotlight began to shift toward Alda's character. It soon became clear that Hawkeye became more than just a co-lead. He was now the moral center of the show, the emotional anchor. And soon after Alda, who was a gifted writer and director, started contributing heavily to the show's creative direction, things really started to look different. Initially, Wayne didn't mind Alda's success. On the contrary, the two were reportedly friendly offset, but naturally, he soon began to feel sidelined. Alda's character seemed to be the only one getting some sort of maturity. The others just appeared stuck in their original cocoons. Anyway, just like that, Trapper John had gone from being a leading man to a supporting character. And as Wayne later explained in interviews, it wasn't about ego, it was about the integrity of storytelling. He once said, Trapper didn't have much to do. He was one of two buddies, and then he became the guy who nodded at everything Alan said. But unlike McLean, who made a public exit and was given a send-off, Wayne chose a different path. Quietly and without a fuss, he decided not to renew his contract after season 3. The producers didn't even know he was officially gone until shortly before filming began for season 4. And here's where things get even more unusual. Wayne's contract with the show was never formally signed, meaning all along he'd been working on a handshake deal. This meant that when the producers threatened to sue him for a breach of contract, they had no legal footing as he hadn't broken anything. He had simply walked away from a show he no longer believed was giving his character the space to grow. His departure was abrupt, and it left the writers scrambling. As a result, they had to rework the opening of season 4, explaining the first episode that Trapper John had been discharged while Hawkeye was on leave. The reaction from the audience was brutal. First, Henry and now Trapper? Was this even real? To make matters worse, there was no farewell scene for him, no hospital party, and most importantly, no heartfelt goodbye. With the producers scrambling to do damage control, in Wayne's place came Mike Farrell as B.J. Honeycutt, a character written to be more grounded, emotionally complex, and perhaps less rebellious than Trapper. With this change, the dynamic of the show shifted immediately. Gone was the buddy comedy edge, and it was a softer, more introspective version of the show. But here's the irony. MASH actually grew deeper and arguably better in Trapper's absence, although many still argue that they prefer the earlier seasons. For us, we'd say the opposite. Wayne, meanwhile, didn't disappear from the spotlight. After MASH, he appeared in TV shows and films, but eventually took an entirely different path, becoming a successful financial investor and commentator. Wayne was smart, very smart. He had studied history at Princeton and later built a career on Wall Street. In fact, by the 1990s, he was a regular panelist on Fox News cash-in discussing economics and policy. He made millions, not from acting, but from savvy investing. Still, he never completely walked away from Hollywood. He did a few TV movies, took on a couple recurring roles, and even joked about his time on MASH in later interviews. Despite the suddenness of his departure, there didn't seem to be any lasting bad blood between him and the cast. In fact, Aldo once said, "Wayne is one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. I miss him a lot when he left." That friendship remained intact. And when Wayne passed away in 2015 at the age of 82, Aldo tweeted, "He was smart, funny, curious, and dedicated. We may have packed to give each other a hard time for the rest of our lives, and I'm sorry we won't have a chance." Although Wayne left MASH at the height of its early popularity, without fanfare or applause, he's still remembered with affection by fans who loved Trapper's playful grin and easygoing charm. We've been all about how all of these actors left to pursue other paths. But how about those who left because the series was so emotionally challenging? Gary Berghoff is ironic, considering he was a heart of the team, but Gary Berghoff didn't leave MASH with fanfare or celebration. He left quietly, painfully, and for reasons far deeper than most people ever realized. To fans, Gary was Radar O'Reilly, the wide-eyed company clerk with uncanny intuition, a teddy bear under one arm and the war under the other. Radar could hear helicopters before anyone else. He had a sweet, almost childlike innocence that softened the harshness of the battlefield. And while Hawkeye and Trapper broke rules and Henry Blake fumbled through leadership, Radar was the glue, soul, and some might even say the emotional heartbeat of the 4077th. But behind that soft voice and nervous smile was an actor slowly unraveling under the weight of it all. Gary was the only actor to reprise his role from the original 1970 MASH film, and in doing so, he brought a vulnerability to Radar that didn't exist in the film. The movie version of Radar was more mischievous, even a little sleazy. But on TV, Gary shaped Radar into something unforgettable, a symbol of lost innocence during wartime. In fact, his performance was so iconic that he was often considered irreplaceable. And yet by season 7, cracks began to show. Gary was struggling, personally and professionally. The grueling production schedule of MASH, combined with his own perfectionism, began to wear him down. He had long battles with anxiety and depression, something that rarely made headlines at the time, but deeply affected his ability to cope with the demands of filming. Then there was the pain of being away from his family. By the late 70s, Gary was married and had a young daughter. But the long hours on set meant he was constantly away from home, and he even later admitted that missing his daughter's early years felt like a mistake I never stopped regretting. In a 2018 interview, co-star Mike Farrell recalled, "Gary had emotional problems. He always felt that he wasn't getting the attention or appreciation he deserved. But I think he underestimated how much we all respected him. There were also contractual disputes stemming from the fact that Gary wanted better pay, more flexibility, and less screen time so he could manage his personal life. The producers, aware of how central Radar was to the show, tried to accommodate him as best they could. At one point, Gary was even granted more time off and fewer appearances per season. But it wasn't enough for him. Emotionally, he was done. And so in season 8, he made the difficult decision to leave MASH for good. But this time, unlike Wayne, the show didn't let him slip away quietly. Radar got a 2-part farewell episode titled Goodbye, Radar, one of the most heart-wrenching storylines in the series. In it, Radar returns from leave to discover the 4077th falling apart in his absence. At first, he tries to fix everything, just like always, but in the end, he realizes it's time to move on. His mother needs him back home. His community farm is in trouble. And perhaps Radar has finally grown up. The final scene of the episode is nearly silent. Just Radar, walking away, silhouetted against Korean sky, his teddy bear left behind on Hawkeye's bunk. That moment was as emotional as it was touching. And it said everything the show couldn't put words to. And the audience felt that loss because watching him leave felt like saying goodbye to our own innocence. After MASH, Gary took a long break from acting. He made a few appearances, including a short-lived spin-off called Walter, where Radar became the rookie cop. But it didn't quite take off. Eventually, he chose to step away from Hollywood altogether. instead devoting himself to painting, wildlife conservation, and inventing. Yes, you heard right, inventing. He held several patents, including one for a fishing tackle system. His love for nature soon became a refuge and a way to heal from the pressures of fame and the emotional toll MASH Asterisk had taken on him. Gary would later explain that he left for two reasons: my family and burnout. I wanted to pick up the pieces of my life. And who could blame him? Today, Gary lives a quiet life. He doesn't do many interviews. He doesn't chase the spotlight. But every now and then, fans will spot him at a convention or read a rare quote, and they remember the kid with the soft heart and the big ears who could hear choppers before anyone else. Now, let's move on to the man who played one of TV's most hilarious villains, Larry Linville. It's hard to imagine early MASH Asterisk without Frank Burns, the rigid, petty, and hopelessly self-important character. Played perfection by Larry Linville, Major Burns was a character audiences loved to hate. His sycophantic obsession with rules, his secret affair with Major Houlihan, and his deep inferiority complex made him the perfect comic foil to Hawkeye and Trapper. But as the show matured, Frank's one-note villainy began to stand out, and not in a good way. While other characters deepened, Frank remained stuck in a loop. His insecurities never evolved, and his prejudices were never challenged. And Larry, an actor with far more range than he was allowed to show, started to feel the strain. By the end of season 5, Larry made a bold decision. He wouldn't renew his contract. In his words, he had taken the character as far as he could. He wasn't fired and definitely wasn't pushed. He simply walked away, recognizing that MASH Asterisk was growing beyond Frank's limited function. And the ripple effect was enormous. With Frank gone, the show was free to explore more layered moral conflicts. There was no longer a need for a cartoon villain. The comedy could come from irony and humanity, rather than slapstick and cruelty. In many ways, we like to think that Larry's exit marked a creative crossroads for MASH Asterisk, one that would elevate from good to legendary. But that doesn't mean fans didn't feel the loss. 4 or 5 seasons, Frank was the punchline and the pressure. His departure forced the series to rethink its rhythm. And while his exit wasn't mourned in the show's storyline, he was written out off-screen as having received a cushy promotion. It was deeply felt in the show's DNA. Larry went on to do guest roles in TV and film, but never again found a part as visible or as unforgettable as Major Frank Burns. Not only was Larry's character written out of the show, another character, who would also later leave the show, was written in to kind of take his place. David Ogden Stiers. If Frank Burns was a cartoon villain, Charles Emerson Winchester III was the slow burn, brought in to replace Frank in season 6. Winchester couldn't have been more different. Cultured, brilliant, arrogant, and deeply private. He was more than just an antagonist. He was a challenge. To Hawkeye, to BJ, to the very tone of the show itself. And David Ogden Stiers played him with exquisite restraint. At first, Winchester came off as pompous and insufferable, but over time, cracks began to show. He wasn't heartless, just guarded, and he definitely wasn't cruel, maybe just a little proud. Beneath the layers of opera and wine talk was a man reckoning with the brutal reality of war, one patient at a time. Unlike Larry or the others, David didn't exit mid-series. He stayed until the final episode, leaving not in protest, but in poetic closure. His final scene, teaching Chinese POWs to play Mozart, is one of the most hauntingly beautiful moments in television history. And that was the power of Winchester. He wasn't there to be liked. He was there to remind us that war breaks everyone, even those who think they're too refined to be touched by it. When given a chance to join the spin-off after MASH Asterisk, David passed on it, explaining that his character's arc was complete. In his words, Winchester had said what he needed to say. Following his successful time on the show, he went on to voice Disney characters, and in 2009, he came out with his sexuality during an interview with the website Gossip Boy, saying, "I am gay, very proud to be so." According to him, he hadn't come out earlier in his career because he feared it might hurt his chances in industry, particularly when he was doing voice work for Disney and still appearing in television and film. At the time, there was real concern that coming out could cost actors roles or lead to typecasting. Despite being private about his personal life for most of his career, He was deeply respected in the industry, both for his dignity and his extraordinary range. He passed away in 2018 at age 75 from bladder cancer. Still, his legacy remains not only in his performances, but also in the quiet courage it took to live his truth on his own terms. But we can't wrap this video up without some honorary mentions. Although the women in this show typically played background and supporting characters, their roles were pivotal to the development of the show's tone. And one such woman was Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, the women of MASH star. In a war zone filled with men cracking jokes to keep the darkness at bay, the women of MASH Asterisk had a tougher job, being seen. And no woman faced a steeper climb or a more remarkable transformation than Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, played by Loretta Swit. When MASH Asterisk began, Margaret was written as a punchline. Her nickname said it all, Hot Lips, a reference to a gag in the original film. She was strict by the book and often the object of ridicule. But Loretta refused to let Margaret stay in that box. With every season, she infused the character with intelligence, strength, and vulnerability. By the end of the series, Margaret wasn't just respected. She was fully realized, complex, and quietly revolutionary. Loretta once said in an interview, "I wanted her to be a woman of substance." And she was. Margaret became a decorated officer, a skilled head nurse, and one of the few characters who openly questioned the war's cruelty while still doing her job with unshakable precision. Interestingly, while many male actors left MASH Asterisk, Loretta stayed for all 11 seasons. She was one of only 4 actors to appear in both the pilot and the finale, while recurring female characters like Lieutenant Ginger Bayless or Nurse Cutler came and went. Margaret stayed and evolved. In a show where war stripped everyone down to their bare selves, Margaret stood tall. And thanks to Loretta's persistence, the only woman in the opening credits made sure the boys didn't carry the show alone. What actors did we miss? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. To enjoy more exciting videos, click play on the video on your screen. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you get notified when a new video drops.